Hello and welcome to the UK reveal of the new Suzuki GSX-8S and Suzuki V-Strom 800DE. I'm Paul de Lusignan and it's my pleasure to lead the motorcycle team here in the UK, and I'm joined by Steve Hacklett, who's our resident expert in motorcycles also here in the UK. So Steve, we're in the studio today with two versions of the 8S, looking absolutely fantastic. Tell us a little bit about this bike.
So in a nutshell, Paul, the 8S is all about performance, technology and style. All the best bits, all the bits that are going to put a smile on people's face can all be traced back to these core elements of the bike.
And why 8S?
So it's a brand new engine, a 776cc 270-degree crank, parallel twin, and yeah, a new platform, a new proposition, a new place in the market and a new product to draw in new customers.
And there's quite a lot of product in the market already, Steve, that's around about 650, 700cc. Why 800? Why 776? Why have we gone up in that capacity? What's the benefit?
The phrase is sweet spot. So what we've seen as other areas of the market and other styles of bikes have become less popular, we know about how massively important adventure bikes have been. And as we say, there's going to be an adventure bike version of this bike as well with the 800DE V-Strom. But street bikes as well, although that 600 classical middleweight segment has been really popular, other manufacturers have been putting bikes in that are starting to creep up a little bit, and equally some of the litre bikes, derivatives have started to emerge that are slightly lower, but there is a spot right in the middle where we can attract people from both different groups and give them a product that's going to satisfy all their needs and be really enjoyable too.
You mentioned 270-degree crank. What does that mean? What's the benefit?
So 270-degree crank is referring to the firing order for the two pistons, with it being a twin engine. So with a 180, one will fire, then there's an equally spaced gap, and then the other one will fire. But that gives you an engine that just doesn't have as much character and as much excitement as you get from a 270-degree crank like we've got here in the 8S. So with that offbeat firing order, the power pulse actually means you can get even more mechanical traction from the bike because you've got that extra gap between the two pulses. But then in terms of the riding experience, the way the engine sounds, you get all this gorgeous noise from the engine, whether it's just at startup at low RPM or under load when you're actually out riding the bike. And then on top of that, to negate any negatives from that extra character and the extra vibration that can be associated with that offbeat firing order, we've got an innovative new balancing system from Suzuki. So some engines will just use one balancer and it doesn't get rid of all that negative resonance, particularly when you've got an engine like this that is so strong, not only at the bottom, but all the way through the mid-range and the high RPM as well. You then to get rid of that resonance, some manufacturers have used a solution where they have a 180-degree system, so two balancers that are either side of the crank. What's new about this is ours are both at 90 degrees to the crank and equidistant as well. So it gets rid of all the unwanted vibration, but you keep all the good stuff, the great noise, the great feel, and all that enjoyment and excitement from the engine.
Sounds like the engineers have been really busy inventing all that stuff, creating that to get all that character. But we already had a fantastic V-twin in our range. Why didn't they just use that?
These bikes aren't going away. This is about an extra product for people to choose from. So when people have had the more classical middleweight bikes for a number of years, whether it's a Suzuki or another brand, and they want to step up, and this is part of the reason for the 776cc engine as well. It's big enough to be a tangible step up for people that have been in that classical middleweight segment with smaller sort of 650 or just approaching 700cc engines. But bigger isn't always better. If you go too big on the cc, it starts to get too heavy, too big, and starts to compromise the chassis design, or also equally too powerful, and then you're starting to tread on the toes of the bigger litre bikes. So at 776, it's a tangible step up for people, and we'll offer them something new when they want to move on to a different style of bike.
So Steve, let's talk a little bit more about that engine. I've noticed that some bikes in this class have got their power right at the peak of their rev range. I'm wondering how usable that is and compared to what we've done on our engines here.
So in thinking about our engine, and I've been fortunate enough to ride the 8S, the two things that really characterise it is a really usable, flexible nature, but it's surprisingly free revving for a parallel twin as well. So the usable nature, although the bike's got some really nice peak figures, most of us don't spend our time in the high RPM range just screaming the engines. So from really low down, you've got ample amounts of torque. In the real world, this could be coming out of a roundabout in second, third, or even fourth gear. There's so much grunt low down, and the engine makes an amazing noise while it's doing it as well. But the story doesn't end there. As you progress onto the mid-range, again, there's no drop-offs. You've still got lots of torque, lots of thrust as you're coming out of the corners and enjoying yourself on your bike. And then that continues all the way up to the peak figures that we see on the spec sheet as well.
And you mentioned kind of free revving, and you mentioned about the torque and stuff. Feels like quite a big engine, but what gives it that free revving big engine feel?
So it's the double overhead cam. Sometimes you might assume with a parallel twin that it might not have that free revving nature that's more akin to a 4-cylinder machine, but it's really surprising. Although you've got all the character of the twin with this bike, and then it's beautifully dialed out with the balancer system that we talked about, because it's a double overhead cam, you really get that fast spin up with the engine as well. No lag and no delay.
And you mentioned the gear changes there, but of course this bike comes standard with quick shifter. You've had a chance to ride the bike. How does that feel?
Yeah, so the quick shifter is not just up and down as well.
Great.
So it's an amazing engine, but as I've experienced on a number of different Suzukis in recent years, to elevate the engine even further, a quick shifter and our bi-directional up and down quick shifter is really the cherry on top of the cake. Whether you are after performance and you're going for those full throttle upshifts or the clutchless downshifts, it's got that performance aspect to it. But also, if you're wanting a lazier ride or you're on a different kind of bike with a more relaxed touring character, it's massively beneficial for that kind of riding as well.
So Steve, let's move away from engines now and talk about the chassis. That's all new as well on these bikes. And the engineers have made the chassis out of tubular steel. There's obviously lots of other choices they could have made. So why have they made that particular choice?
So there's a number of different benefits. In terms of the handling characteristics, it really aids the low speed handling of the bike. Also packaging benefits as well. The bike's got a 14-litre tank, which is perfect for bikes in this kind of part of the market. If we'd gone for, say, an aluminium chassis, it would have needed bigger section tubes to make the frame, and that would have reduced the fuel tank size. Critically, it also would have really impacted the ergonomics for the bike, because the steel sections are much smaller, but still really, really strong and helping contribute to the agility and all the straight line stability for the bike. It also means that we can make the bike available to a lot more different size and style of riders as well.
And some bikes in the kind of 700 to 750, 800cc class have got a frame that's kind of one piece, you know, the whole frame. But I notice here that we've got a separate subframe. Why have we chosen to do that?
It's intrinsically got a more premium look to it, but there's some really purposeful design in there as well. It allows us, as part of our new engine and chassis, we're not only using it in this bike, but also in the V-Strom 800DE as well. So we can optimize the weight and the weight distribution for this bike to get a really sharp, enjoyable handling characteristic, but then for the V-Strom, where we need hard luggage capability, we can put a different rear subframe on that's got all the extra strength that's required for a different set of customers and a different set of needs. Equally, even on this bike, if you've got a single piece frame, everybody could have a standing drop down again, and that could potentially write off the entire bike, whereas actually having a separate frame means it's much cheaper and easier for people if that was to happen.
Okay, so some great advantages there and real world kind of usability. And it looks fantastic as well, doesn't it? It's really nice to see that highlighted on the bike. Okay, so let's talk about electronics. So I know it's different between the two different bikes, what they've got. So let's talk about the 8S first of all. So what's the rider going to be experienced from an electronics point of view?
So I think an important thing to note with Suzuki is we make amazing engines, beautiful chassis, combine them in a really balanced way where they support one another in terms of the ride character. And then the electronics aren't there to fix any flaws. It's just about making it more usable for more people in more diverse conditions. We've already touched on the quick shifter and those benefits. So over and above that, we've got power modes. So Suzuki Drive Mode Selector. So that's an A, B and C mode. So depending on how confident you are as a rider, what the weather conditions are doing, and just how you feel on riding that day, you can tune how aggressive the throttle ramp is for any given amount of input. On top of that, you've also got traction control. So for the 8S, that is a 1, 2 and 3 mode. So you've got steadily more active levels of intervention to both predict and detect wheel spin, just to keep you enjoying your ride to the absolute maximum.
Great, and nice dashboard as well, looks really great.
Yep, so as well as it being 5 inches and full colour TFT, it's really, really easy to use. So even in bright sunlight, it's got really, really strong contrast, so it's easy to see in all different conditions. Not only that, it's also got a manual or automatic change from day and night mode. So day mode being white, night mode flips and inverts the display so it's black. And as I say, either you can leave it in auto mode and there's a light sensor on the dash that will automatically change to the light conditions, or if you much prefer one setting or the other, I know a lot of people really like the look of the nighttime setting, and you can keep it in that all the time you like. So as well as the electronics that we talked about earlier, it's also got all your trip information, your gear position, your road speed, and really helpful and useful to see at a glance.
Sounds like it might be quite fiddly though. That's lots of stuff to happen.
Now, one thing I think we pride ourselves on with our electronics and our displays is how intuitive everything is to use. So that starts with a really nice clear display, which we've got with this brand new colour TFT, but then the switch gear as well. They're not monstrous huge switch gear like can happen with some electronics. There's only a couple of buttons. You've got a nice rocker switch and a mode button, and those alone allow you to navigate all of the different trips and all of the electronics as well. The main thing is electronics are there to support a ride, not to overpower it. We've got a great engine, a really nice chassis. They combine brilliantly in a balance. The electronics are the cherry on top of the cake, and then that switch gear and the display is all about making it easy to use so that you can just get on with enjoying your ride, which is ultimately what it's all about.
Absolutely, that's what it's all about. And now, some people have said to me, the bike doesn't have an IMU. Why not? Why did we not put an IMU on the bike?
So IMU, inertial measurement unit, that would basically be a lean angle sensor that's going to feed extra data that can be powered into things like your ABS and your traction control. There's two different things. There's a point at which you might feel for a particular type of product that it really needs it. We've already talked about how much mechanical extra grip there is from the engine firing order. We'll go on to talk about things like the tyres and the brilliant chassis setup there. And it's about, if you put too much specification on a bike and you overspec it, we just make it more expensive and it's less accessible for more customers. Suzuki are a value pack product, and value isn't just throwing everything in the kitchen sink. It's the right mix of things for the right customer that mean a really rewarding ride. The electronics support the amazing chassis and engine for this bike, and it will give people everything they need without overspecking the bike and outpricing people out of the market.
So Steve, you mentioned tyres, but let's talk about tyres and suspension. What are we being offered on this bike from the engineers?
So we talked about the great engine and the underlying chassis, but the chassis finishing kit, the tyres and the suspension is absolutely critical to the ride experience. So both for aesthetics and performance, we've got upside down, big diameter KYB forks at the front, and then we've got a preload adjustable KYB shock at the rear. And all these settings have been carefully tested with the engineers and on our test bed in Japan to make sure the 8S performs for as many riders as well as it possibly can. Critically, where the rubber hits the road, we've got custom developed Dunlop Road Sport 2 tyres on this bike. And the reason I say custom developed, Dunlop have worked with our engineering team in Japan, so we've tweaked the compound of the tyre, the belt construction to really optimise the ride experience. And then beyond those features, we've also got a 180 section rear on this bike as well. So not only does it look like a big bike, it's got all the credentials that go with it and critically the ride experience that it delivers as well.
So Steve, customers love to personalise their bike, so there's a range of genuine Suzuki accessories coming. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really flexible bike that we've talked about, and the accessory range complements that beautifully. Whether it's styling, so the solo seat cowl on the white machine we've got behind us, or the striking rim tapes to elevate the look of the machine, there's then really practical stuff as well. Just to the left of the gorgeous new TFT colour display is a little USB power socket so people can power up their devices. And then you've got even more practical things like luggage. So we've got two different size tank bags like you can see on the white bike behind us, and then a really innovative soft luggage system as well. The panniers are ever so easy to get on and off quickly, and even some of the bracketry for them clips off to leave a really clean, beautiful look to the machine as well.
So Steve, you can't help but notice we've got a new Suzuki Blue on the bike, so that's one element of the design. Tell us a bit about that, and then tell us about the design concept overall.
Yeah, so a really striking cosmic blue. Not only is it on the bodywork for the blue bike, but it also features on the wheels for the white bike as well, and this gorgeous fabricated subframe as well. In terms of the overall aesthetic, it's got a real mass-forward, pouncing, aggressive stance and really sharp lines that punctuate the bike. The absolute standout feature has got to be the striking face of the bike. Something that's quintessentially Suzuki with that stacked light configuration, but thoroughly modern. It's a full LED headlight, and when the lights are illuminated, it get a real strong feature from these position lights that flank the main headlights as well.
Okay, I think it looks absolutely fantastic. And availability in the market, when do we think this is going to be in our dealerships?
So the great news is for the hemisphere that we're in is that for springtime, so when the good weather comes, this bike will be in dealerships by then, and we'll put out on our social channels exactly as we get closer to arrival and start sale.
Okay, great. So Steve, we've done a real deep dive into the 8S here today. So can you just sum it up in 3 words for me?
Without question, it's got to be performance, technology and style.
I think those three words sum it up really well, Steve. This bike certainly is born to thrill. But we've also launched a sibling to this bike today in the V-Strom 800DE. We haven't got one here with us today, but can you tell us something more about that bike? Why a V-Strom, why DE?
So I think it's three key areas, Paul. There's the great facets of this bike that are also inherent on the 800DE. There's the things that are intrinsically V-Strom, no matter what capacity it is. And then there's the stuff that this bike brings to the table that are absolutely brand new. So in terms of the inherited features, we've got this great new engine, all the character and performance we talked about. We've got the tech in terms of the power modes, the traction control, the up and down quick shifter, and the gorgeous new colour TFT. In terms of sort of V-Stromness, it's the comfort, it's the long distance touring capability, it's the really big usable fuel tank that will give you great riding range. And then the new layer of stuff is the off-road capability. Front and back, we've got 220 millimeters of travel. Not only that, you've got 220 millimeters of ground clearance. So this is the most capable V-Strom for going off of paved roads we've ever made.
So it's pretty unlimited really. So if you come across a gravel road or some adventure track you want to go down, you really can with a V-Strom.
Yeah, literally any terrain, any horizon, any adventure, this is your bike. You've got all that suspension travel we've talked about. You've also got a small profile, 21-inch front wheel. You've got tube tyres that are really durable and robust. It's perfect for your adventure.
And there's some different technology on the V-Strom as well, isn't there?
There is indeed. So as well as the things that we've already talked about on the 8S, there's some extra modes that are specifically targeted at when you're going onto looser off-road surfaces. So first is in the traction control, and it's a gravel or G mode as it'll appear on the dash. What this will do is it will come in early like the most sensitive of the traction control modes, but rather than cutting power altogether, it will still deliver a predictable, consistent amount of power that means an experienced rider can choose to engage this mode and then keep the back wheel spinning on loose surfaces as they round a bend. Equally, they've got the option to fully disengage the system, just like you can on the 8S. And then we've also got some options when it comes to the braking technology. So there's two different ABS settings that appear in the top right-hand corner of the dash. So you've got a 1 and a 2, so a slightly more and slightly less intrusive version of the ABS for being on these looser surfaces. Or again, for the more experienced rider, you completely disengage the rear ABS, which is something an experienced off-road rider will really want to be able to do.
Great. And so there's a real bias in the development of that bike to kind of being off-road and being able to go on an adventure, but also the ability to do that with a pillion, with luggage.
Absolutely, yeah. It's undergone extensive testing back at the factory in Japan, using lots of off-road terrain to test the bike. As you say, not just one up, but having that different subframe strong enough for 3-box aluminium luggage and a pillion, and to go onto unpaved surfaces.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you very much. So today you've heard about our two brand new bikes, our GSX-8S, born to thrill, and our V-Strom 800DE, born to explore. It's fantastic to launch these new bikes in the UK. They'll be available in the spring. Please start talking to your dealers to be on that list now. Thank you very much.